Dave Bautista is one of only a handful of pro wrestlers who have managed to break free from their character and parlay that fame into a successful film career. Which is not to say that he ever left the wrestling world fully behind. He's one of the top action stars in Hollywood and an in-demand actor recognized worldwide. To many, though, he'll always be Batista, without the "you", and if that's his legacy, there are certainly far worse ones to have than being one of the biggest draws in WWE for years. It's easy to say someone like Dave Bautista has a good life, but a lot of that has been him finding the silver lining in tragedy. Kenna. Bridge of Spirits, is a new action-adventure game, the first foray into video games by Ember Lab, an animation studio perhaps best known for its viral short film based on The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask. In Kenna, the player controls the titular character, a spirit guide tasked with guiding lost souls to their final resting place. Eventually, Kenna stumbles upon a corrupted and abandoned village at the base of a mountain, which houses a spirit shrine Kenna is attempting to reach. This is a man who grew up poor, had no direction in his life until wrestling, got into fights with his employer, and had a fraught personal life because of it. In order to get there, she must first do her duty and put the agitated souls of the village to rest. Along the way, Kenna encounters the rot, nature spirits that assist her in defeating the land's corruption and angry spirits. He's had to overcome many obstacles to get to where he is, and that's commendable, but those tragic details should not be ignored. There was violence at his literal doorstep growing up. Saying that Dave Bautista watched violence from his front door isn't a metaphor. He grew up in Washington, D.C., during the height of the 80s crime wave. The adorable creatures are a great asset to Kenna, and play an important part in the game as well. His entire neighborhood was dangerous, but that danger often found its way so close that he didn't even need to leave his own home. Through his window, a young Bautista saw a mob of people beat a man and almost throw him off an overpass. While critics have found that the cute characters and generally bloodless action gameplay make Kenna the perfect family-friendly experience, there are a few key takeaways that will most likely only be picked up by adults. He also saw his own mother get attacked. The final straw was when his mom found a man shot to death outside their home. In fact, the story and themes of the game seem to be the most important aspect of its development. As Ember Lab co-founder Mike Greer told Soul Vision magazine, Kenna deals with people struggling with loss or struggling with a mistake they made. I hope people connect with the story and the themes of the game as much as the gameplay. But what exactly are some of those themes Greer may be talking about? Beware of spoilers ahead for Kenna, Bridge of Spirits. Kenna focuses on death and the afterlife. One of the main themes throughout Kenna, Bridge of Spirits, is, unsurprisingly, that of death and the afterlife. However, what might be a shock to some people is just how unflinchingly the game looks at these concepts. In Kenna, the protagonist comes upon a desolate village that has been corrupted by malevolent spirits. She called the cops and, while waiting for them to arrive, noticed her children playing outside and completely unfazed by the murder scene. In a traditional 3-act gameplay setup, along with a prologue, the player encounters 3 agitated spirits and must calm them down to gain access to the sacred mountain. She realized that if her children could see a man die without getting upset, it was time to move. The family relocated to San Francisco shortly afterwards. Backstage Fight with Booker T. The year is 2006 and Batista is at the peak of his popularity in WWE. He was one of the company's top stars, served as the main event at the previous year's WrestleMania, and was always in the title picture. However, these spirits aren't just agitated for no reason. He was also, by all accounts, kind of a jerk. This led to a legit fight with veteran wrestler Booker T at a photoshoot for SummerSlam 2006. News of the fight was originally broken by WWE themselves, which would normally be cause for skepticism, but enough people involved have spoken outside the auspices of the company to confirm that it actually happened. No two accounts agree on who won the fight, or if there was a winner at all, but most agree that Booker started it after he felt Batista disrespected him. Most records also indicate Booker won, with Booker himself telling Wrestling Inc. that, Batista took a good beating, but he's a man. Producer Fit Finlay told Sportskeeda that he arrived towards the end of the fight and saw Batista on top, but was more impressed with the fact that Batista no-sold a kick to the groin by Booker's wife Sharmell. In Dave Bautista's autobiography, Bautista Unleashed, he admitted his own fault. Booker's earned respect in this business. I didn't show it, and I was wrong. Batista returned to WWE in 2014 after a 4-year absence. The game focuses specifically on the ideas of loss and finally learning to let go. It also concentrates on the existence of an afterlife in general. Although the game exists in a nebulous environment, neither the village or Kenna's homeland is ever named for the player. It does establish the idea of spirits and a type of religion quite strongly. The village had a mask maker who crafted masks for the deceased, and the masks only disappear once the spirit has fully moved on from their world. He was greeted as a hero before inadvertently becoming a heel through no fault of his own. These masks play a big part in the plot of Kenna, and the dissolving of the masks is used throughout the plot to signify the peaceful passing of a spirit. Kenna, Bridge of Spirits is an environmental allegory. Although Kenna, Bridge of Spirits, focuses a lot on death, the game also delves quite deeply into the living world, specifically when it comes to environmental concerns. It all went down at one of the most maligned pay-per-views in recent memory, the 2014 Royal Rumble. Batista entered number 28 in the Royal Rumble. The entire second act of the game is devoted to the idea of environmental degradation, focusing on a corrupted spirit that destroyed the ecosystem of her home while alive. By overusing and destroying the environment, the spirit ended up tethered to the destruction she caused. There was one problem. The entire building had their heart set on Daniel Bryan entering. She is only able to move on once she makes peace with her actions and finds balance with the world around her. Aside from this section of the game, environmental concerns are also peppered throughout the main storyline. As the Rumble went on, the fans booed each new entrant, and Batista was no exception. Kenna first encounters the rot, nature spirits, because she exists in a state of harmony with the world around her. Additionally, players learn that the final spirit of the game, the village leader named Toshi, actually caused the village's destruction, and he did so because the environment of the mountain was changing, thanks to the actions of the rot god. Even when longtime fan favorite Rey Mysterio entered at 30, he was vociferously booed for the crime of not being Daniel Bryan. It wasn't long before the match reached the climax. With 4 men left in the ring, fans quickly turned against Batista. Nobody wanted to see another part-timer take a spot from a workhorse. Alas, it was not to be. Batista threw Roman Reigns over the top rope and won the Rumble, to a shower of boos. It's a moment known by fans as Bautista, one of the most memorable Rumble endings for all the wrong reasons. Dave Bautista himself has seldom addressed it, if ever, but many of his fellow wrestlers felt bad that he was booed for something that wasn't his fault. As bad as this was, it at least led to a good ending. This was one of the key moments that led Bryan to the main event of WrestleMania XXX, where he faced off against Batista and Randy Orton. Batista even tapped out to Bryan, giving the indie legend his first WWE championship. He's been accused of steroid use. Batista was king during the most muscle-bound era that the WWE has ever known. While the village elder, Zajiro, tried to convince Toshi that change and decay is a natural part of life, Toshi tried to take matters into his own hands, destroying the ancient spirit on the mountain, which ultimately brought ruin to his home. Kenna is heavily influenced by Southeast Asian culture. Mike Greer, one of the founders of Ember Labs, which created Kenna, Bridge of Spirits, has cited his time in Asia as an influence for the video game's story and aesthetic. He lived in Tokyo for 3 years when he was younger, and Greer told Soul Vision magazine that this experience helped shape some of the creative choices he made in Kenna. Specifically, the architecture and environments in Kenna seem to be greatly influenced by Japanese culture, including the use of traditional lanterns and the appearance of what looks to be a cherry blossom tree in one of the game's areas. Balinese culture is heavily drawn upon in Kenna, as well. The idea of carved wooden masks housing spirits is directly taken from this culture, via the culture trip, and is a core concept that is heavily featured in the game. Bodybuilder physiques were necessary for main event pushes, where ripped men like Triple H and Batista were always in the title picture while smaller guys were mid-card at best. Maintaining that physique often takes a little more than a relentless attitude in the gym, which has led to several accusations of steroid use aimed at Batista. After Batista suffered a bicep injury in 2009, Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer newsletter noted that the wrestler's new look raised a lot of eyebrows, and that biceps will tear more frequently on steroids. Writer Irv Muchnick emailed Meltzer in an attempt to clarify whether this injury was indeed due to steroids, and Meltzer responded, "Obviously, it was steroid-related. But in fairness, guys not on steroids also tear biceps and not triceps. 2 years earlier, ESPN reported that Dave Bautista was a client of a pharmacy under investigation for supplying steroids, but he denied he ever took steroids and was never suspended by WWE for any violation. So it's on record. There's no definitive proof that Bautista ever used steroids. But since he's been able to stay ripped for decades, spent time in a profession with known predilection toward steroids, and can't shake industry whispers that he uses them, it's easy to see why people wonder. He quit WWE the first time because they wouldn't let him do movies. Batista left WWE in 2010, after losing an "I Quit" match with John Cena at Over the Limit. It was the last anyone saw of him in the company for 4 years, and at the time, his departure left more questions than answers. During an interview on MLW Radio Writers' Room, Dave Bautista claimed that WWE denying him opportunities to do movies is what pushed him away. WWE has their own movie arm, WWE Studios. The music used in the game's score is also mainly Balinese or Balinese-inspired. It largely produces direct-to-video action movies and lowbrow comedy, but it's also a way for wrestlers to take time away from the ring, hone new skills, and collect a different, and occasionally bigger, paycheck. In fact, the game's composer, Jason Galati, closely collaborated with Balinese ensemble Gamelan Kudamani to create a traditional sound for the game. According to Game Informer, Greer and Galati even traveled to Bali to record some of the songs, because the traditional bamboo-style instruments needed to create the music would be too complicated to transport to the United States. Bautista got frustrated after Cena kept getting movies and commercial roles while he was left out, despite the fact that they were more or less the two faces of the company at the time. After getting passed over time and time again, Bautista asked WWE if he could audition for outside projects. The result of this collaboration is a gorgeous soundtrack that really serves to immerse the player in the environment. Kenna discusses the pressures of responsibility while each of the corrupted spirits the player encounters in Kenna Bridge of Spirits is unique in their own situations and problems. They do have a few things in common. Specifically, each of the spirits seem to have succumbed to the pressures they were facing in life. He claims they responded, "You're our property." Throughout the 3 acts, Kenna faces an older brother, Taro, a master inventor, Adira, and the village leader, Toshi. Get dressed for the house show and get to work. It's worth noting, as always, that WWE talent are technically independent contractors, but the terms of that contract are often so suffocating that it's functionally full-time employment. In 2009, Batista gave WWE 1 year's notice and left in 2010. What made his departure even sadder was, per his own claim, that few people backstage said goodbye or thanked him. He was once directionless and had a gym addiction like many people in their 20s. Dave Bautista found himself directionless for a period of time. He spent a lot of that time working out, honing an already naturally intimidating frame. He told Men's Health in 2017 that, "I'm just so addicted to working out. Not only do I need it physically, but I need it mentally as well." During their lives, they all became overwhelmed by the responsibilities they had to those around them. "It's a therapy for me." When he was younger, that addiction may have been a lot more literal. After spending time as a bouncer, doing the odd petty crime, and having 2 daughters with his first wife, he had no idea what he wanted to do with his life. Taro had to care for his younger siblings after their parents died. When the storms came, however, he lost them in the forest, and his guilt over his perceived failure to protect them ultimately drove his spirit to corruption. Adira and Toshi had similar fates. During this time, he developed what he called reverse anorexia. He'd spend all night working, and then go to the gym for hours, never feeling he was ever big enough. Both believed they should have been able to save the village in their own way. Adira believed she should have been able to harness the power of the mountain to protect the village, and Toshi refused to move their home because he felt a responsibility to the land. Adira also didn't want to leave the home she had built because it was the only place her partner, Hannah, would look for her. The next thing you know, he recounted to the Tampa Bay Times, 10 years goes by, and there I'm trying to borrow money to buy my kids Christmas presents. What ultimately got him out of this was enrolling at the Wild Samoan Training Center around his 30th birthday, with the tuition and living expenses paid for by a friend. Moving would spell defeat in their eyes, something neither Adira nor Toshi could allow. Ultimately, their stubbornness in the face of this responsibility led to the corruption of their own spirits. Kenna. Bridge of Spirits is ultimately about forgiveness. The key takeaway from Kenna. Bridge of Spirits is that forgiveness is essential in life. 5 years later, he was a world champion in WWE. His signature glasses hid his stage fright. The signature item for both Dave Bautista, the man, and Batista, the wrestler, are his tinted sunglasses. As a wrestler, he'd wear them in the darkest of night, in any arena, and during any and all promos. These were more than just a fashion statement. They were a security blanket for a man who was terrified of public speaking. Bautista revealed his fear on Michael Rosenbaum's Inside of You podcast. However, the game doesn't really focus on the forgiveness of others. Physicality was not an issue for him, but he knew that he'd have a low ceiling as a big scary man who can't talk. I really wanted to move up. If I wanted to progress in my career, I had to be a well-rounded professional wrestler. Which means you have to start speaking and acting. It was my nightmare. As such, he made some wardrobe choices to compensate. People always ask me why I wore sunglasses and hats and stuff when I was doing promos in the ring. That was my pacifier, hiding behind those things. His methods worked. He became a reliably solid promo guy, got a Hollywood career out of it, and picked up an identifiable feature. He regrets never having gotten a formal education. During an interview with Sport Bible, Dave Bautista spent a fair amount of time speaking about his regrets. While each corrupted spirit does have a non-corrupted spirit that was their friend in life, Taro has his siblings, Adira has Hana, and Toshi has his mentor, those non-corrupted spirits had forgiven their friends long ago. What Kenna has to do is discover the corrupted spirit's fear, love, and regret, which will ultimately allow them to understand just what it is that has caused them to become corrupted. At the end of each act, and the game, the corrupted spirits return to their uncorrupted selves, and their friends come to reunite with them. He went over his failed marriage, his injuries, and lots of the sacrifices he had to make. Along with Kenna, they must convince the once corrupted spirits that what they did wasn't so terrible. In order to move on and find peace within themselves, they must first acknowledge that what happened was out of their control, and they have to forgive themselves. Only by facing the events near the end of their lives with self-acceptance and grace is a spirit able to finally shed whatever is keeping it tethered to the living world. Ultimately, Kenna and the spirit friends are able to show the other spirits their regrets, but also their love, and use this as a catalyst to allow them to move on. Forgiveness, both from without and within, is the key. Kenna acknowledges those left behind after death. Even though a big focus of Kenna, Bridge of Spirits, is on death and spirits, almost equal attention is paid to those who are left behind in the world of the living. Although it is somewhat relegated to the background of the plot, Kenna's own personal quest does get addressed throughout the game, especially towards the end of the story. One point has stuck in his craw all these years: he never got a full, formal education. Kenna discovers the abandoned village on her search for the sacred mountain shrine, which was an extremely special place for her late father. He was living on his own by the time he was 17, and wasn't able to finish his senior year of high school. It's a decision that continues to haunt him, and it was a point he hammered home in his interview. "If I could go back and do it again, I know this sounds cliché, but I would go back and focus on education." Her father was also a spirit guide, and Kenna has long hoped that, by returning to the sacred mountain shrine, she'll be able to feel closer to her father. This recurring element of loved ones affecting those they left behind is also prevalent throughout Kenna's interactions with the spirits. "I always preach that. I preach that to my kids, and I believe that because that's something that you can take with you no matter where you are in your life or where you are in the world." His womanizing damaged his relationships during his wrestling days. Dave Bautista could hardly control himself around women. While Bautista has never outright admitted he cheated on his wife, there have long been persistent rumors that his relationship with Melina was part of what caused his divorce. Bautista even developed a reputation for sleeping around with the Divas roster, with rumors connecting him to names like Layla L and Rosa Mendez. While the specifics are fuzzy and often just wrestling scuttlebutt, he's been open about the time he spent womanizing while wrestling. "I didn't drink or do drugs. Women were my drug of choice," he told news.com.au. "I would have 10, 20, 30 girls throwing themselves at me." She even mentions to the village elder's spirit that she will miss the spirits who cross over, even though it's a necessary step. Those who are left behind are affected just as much by someone's death as they were by their life. This concept is also physically manifested in the game world by the existence of the corrupted environment. The negative energy from those corrupted spirits was so strong that it bled over into the real world, adversely affecting the lives of those left behind. Kenna. Bridge of Spirits explains that moving on is not forgetting as a spirit guide. Kenna helps spirits move on. However, that is not the only form of letting go that the game focuses on. I wasn't equipped to handle it. The game also explores the idea that moving forward isn't the same thing as forgetting about something, or someone. This concept is also during the game's central plotline. In one instance, the village leader, Toshi, complains about the failing land around the village. When Zajiro tells him that this means it's time to move to a new location and that their home is wherever their people are, Toshi refused, ultimately leading to the village's destruction. This line of thinking is echoed in the plotline of Adira. So I took advantage. Although, as he pointed out, he dodged developing any kind of drinking or drug addiction, he eventually realized that he did indeed have his own problem. He cleaned up his act not long after this realization, wanting to be a good role model for his daughters. I don't have a lot of regrets in my life and I haven't been an angel, he reflected. She did not want to leave her home either, fearing her companion Hannah would not be able to find her way back if she left her physical location. But if I could change anything, it'd be the chapter with all the women. It hurt the people I love. He had a no-show father and his grandparents shunned his mother. The Bautista family was not a particularly stable environment for young Dave. His father, a hairdresser, was a non-presence. His mother Donna Ray's conservative Greek-American family shunned her. A little bit because she was a lesbian who openly dated women, but mostly because she was a Democrat and had liberal leanings. What they didn't understand was that this didn't mean they had to forget about where they came from. The game also points to this idea with the Rot, Kenna's nature spirit companions. At the end of the game, the player finds out the Rot are small manifestations of the nature spirit that guarded the mountain and whom Toshi destroyed in a rage. Eventually, Kenna tells the Rot it's okay for them to leave her, and they do, slowly reforming in the image of the nature god. The player is left with the idea that it does not matter if something leaves them. Their mere existence affects them in a way that means they will never be forgotten, meaning they're never truly gone. Kenna points to the benefits of meditation and doing good deeds. One of the most accurate, and oddly amusing, parts of Kenna, Bridge of Spirits, is the way in which the main character levels up and can increase their stats. By doing good things throughout the land, like cleaning altars and righting broken status, Kenna can gain karma, which can be spent to increase her abilities. This is a direct parallel to how the player should perhaps act in life. Should the player treat the environment and those around them with kindness and respect, they will gain good karma, which can potentially help them better navigate the real world. Additionally, there are no stats in Kenna, apart from the title character's health bar. She raised her children during the day and worked at a shop developing photographs at night. The only way the player can permanently increase the size of this bar is by finding mediation spots hidden throughout the game. The family was so poor they'd reinforce their shoes with cardboard to avoid getting their feet wet. Adversity can forge strong, lasting bonds, and Bautista loves his mom, who always cared for him and was courageous enough to be open about her sexuality in an era when that wasn't common. He told news.com.au that, "I never had an issue with my mother's sexuality." This feels like the game basically telling the player, meditation is good for you. Fans have noted that the game's music has made them want to meditate, so it seems like the design of the game is working as intended. The existence of meditation in the world also ties directly back into the game's themes of harmony and the ability to just let go. She loved us, she cared for us, and that's all that mattered. She was with my dad for a small part of my life. In fact, the last thing the player can do in-game before the credits roll is meditate, with the assumption being that Kenna has at last followed her own advice, and is finally at peace with her father's death. Kenna. Bridge of Spirits is similar to another PlayStation, PC exclusive, Kenna. Bridge of Spirits, is an absolute joy to play, earning excellent reviews thanks to its cute characters, thrilling combat, and a beautiful environment. So it's probably no surprise that it brings to mind another fantastic PlayStation, PC exclusive game, Horizon Zero Dawn. For those who need a quick refresher on Guerrilla Games' most recent action-adventure game, Horizon Zero Dawn follows the exploits of Aloy and her quest to rid the world of the corruption of the machine animals found throughout the game. Aloy does eventually stumble into a larger story, but at their foundations, Horizon Zero Dawn, and Kena, are quite similar. Aside from comparably gorgeous environments and music, some of the gameplay mechanics are the same. Kena and Aloy make use of many of the same weapons: bow, spear, and bombs. Both games also feature similar yellow, white markings and symbols used on cliffs to tell the player where to climb, and of course, both star singular female protagonists. After that, I don't remember her having anything but girlfriends. Publications like Trending News Buzz have pointed out the similarities between the titles, which illustrate a continued boom in new female-driven action-adventure stories, via Wired. The success of games like Horizon Zero Dawn and Kena, and the hype surrounding Horizon Forbidden West, indicate that not only are female protagonists able to hold their own as singular player options, they are also capable leads in exciting and beautiful games. And I never thought of her as my mom the lesbian. She was Mom, an incredibly strong woman who always did her best to keep me out of trouble and keep me alive. His many injuries before becoming one of Hollywood's most bankable action stars, Dave Bautista had a series of careers that just screamed, injury-prone, bouncer, bodybuilder, wrestler, MMA fighter. Indeed, as a pro wrestler, Batista developed a reputation as one of the more injury-susceptible men on WWE's roster. It's not even bad luck, it's just the natural byproduct of being the face of the company. Wrestling that much, at that high a level, while maintaining that physique, meant that injuries were always going to be a risk for him. Batista's most notable ailment was a tricep injury in January 2006 that ended his record-setting World Heavyweight Championship title reign at 282 days. He's torn his biceps and triceps several times. Batista also claims that he was dealing with an injury when Booker T picked a fight with him, saying on the Inside of You podcast that, "We got into it anyway, but I always thought it was really low of him to start a fight with me when he knew I was injured. Even if he was pissed at me or not, you don't fight a guy who's dealing with an injury." Dave Bautista has experienced dyslexia, and depression. During an interview on Talk Is Jericho promoting Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Dave Bautista spoke about an issue that plagued him for years: slight dyslexia. He states that it's been especially difficult since he became an actor, since it makes table reads that much more difficult. Even so, he's been open about his condition, once using it as a humorous way to hit back at a troll on Twitter. By coincidence, Bautista is far from the only person in his orbit with some degree of dyslexia. WWE chief Vince McMahon has made overcoming dyslexia part of his own brand, and fellow Guardian of the Galaxy Zoe Saldana has it as well. Some sources indicate that Bautista has ADD as well, and he's also been open about his struggles with depression.